good, the true, the beautiful, in everything we find. Aesthetic Cloud, we strive to make a world that's kind and bright.
It's February 24, 2026, the 8th meeting in person of our 143rd year of the Little Rock Aesthetic Club. Please, as always, silence your cell phones, put them into airplane mode so we don't interfere with Lynn's recording. And please sign the guest book. If you're watching this on YouTube, please tell Jeanette Hamilton, our vice president, text her with your name that you have watched the program. And if you're doing any kind of catch up from programs in the past, please tell her what date you have watched. Thank you. We have a number of guests. I'm just delighted. As I call your name, would you please stand? We have Stephanie Gunderman, and she's a guest of Jeffrey McKinley. Carolyn Eastham, she's a guest of Susan Marsh. Quinton Smith and Bonnie Bailey are guests of Susan Bornay, and also her two daughters, Rachel and Eliza, are guests here as well, and they're coming in the back door. Kathy White and Diana Thayer are longtime friends of Wita Keck. And lastly, we have Sally Martins, a guest of Nancy Griffin. So, welcome to all of you. There's seats up front. Come on down. You can come on down. You want to see your mom up here. The minutes from the February 10 meeting were emailed to you. Are there any corrections or additions? We will then show that they have been approved. The chairman of hostesses today is Susan Marsh, and she'll come and explain to you and tell us about all the wonderful decorations that we have.
Well, hello, good afternoon. Well, as we approach the end of February, which is Black History Month, it's good to take time to reflect on experiences of some African Americans in our country. Many thanks to Eileen Hicks and Catherine Stewart, who as members of the Hostess Committee helped to put together these displays. In support of today's papers, we highlight the location in which the events you will hear about took place. One occurred in the Low Country of Georgia. On display here are some cotton stalks, which continue today as an important crop in the area, but another equally important crop was rice. On the table, we have a sack of Carolina gold rice, which, in spite of the name, was widely grown in Georgia. Living in that area also, and still are living there, are the Gullah Geechee, who weave distinctive basketry from sweetgrass, and there are several examples of their artistry on the table. Another location is Nashville, Tennessee, and Nashville is known as the center of country music, but it is also the home of Fisk University, a historically Black college. On the table over there are two pictures of a choral ensemble, one of the original group and one of the group performing currently. Also, there is a book from 1929 entitled American Negro Spirituals, which documents over 122 spirituals. The book is open to a well-known song, and you're welcome to leaf through it later. We had planned on having the flower arrangement include the state flowers of Georgia and Tennessee, but it's February, and they're not blooming yet. So the hydrangea remind us of the blue iris, the state flower of Tennessee, And the daisies represent the state wildflower of Georgia, the azalea. And the white flowers are to honor and acknowledge the African American men and women and children whose names have been lost to history. And on the mantle, we display pictures of some of these people. They are arranged as one would show pictures of family members, because we know whoever we are and wherever we are members of the human family.
Thank you. Today's presentations, as you know, are about Black history, which we remember especially in the month of February. The quote of the day, which is up here, "No pain is like that of writing indelibly upon the soul." Horatius Bonar was a Scottish churchman, a poet, and is principally remembered as a prodigious hymnodist, a writer of hymns. The quote speaks to much of history's painful topics and events. There are some who would erase or paper over our collective sad past, but one must learn from all history and endeavor to do better as an individual, as a group, as a state, or a country as we all go forward. I recently finished a book about time travel called The Ministry of Time, and I have a quote from that that says, "The only thing you can mend is the future." Cynthia Ross is our chairman of the day. Cynthia is a retired radiation oncologist, having practiced at Carti for 22 years. She spends half her time in Santa Fe with her husband, Martin Hauer Jensen. They have one 27-year-old daughter, Miriam, so she's not spending all of her time in Santa Fe. She's been spending time wherever her daughter was in school or graduate school. Currently, Miriam is in graduate school in marine biology at Oregon State University, my alma mater, and at also doing work at the Hatfield Science Center in Newport. Cynthia now does a lot of volunteer work, tutoring in math and reading, ESL, and teaches swimming. Most days she swims, cooks, reads, and enjoys with time with family and friends. She's been a member of the Aesthetic Club since 2012 and has given 5 papers and been chairman of the Entertainment Committee. Cynthia.
Thank you, Marcia. Good afternoon, Madam President, fellow estates, near and far, and guests. Our quote of the day, as Marcia has read, is that pain is like that of sorrow for writing indelibly upon the soul. As today we acknowledge and honor Black History Month, his writing about sorrow and soul resonates strongly. There are scholarly studies that explore the idea that intergenerational trauma is connected to the history of slavery. Neuroscience has shown that strong emotions activate the amygdala and that emotional memory is the strongest under sorrow, causing memories to be stored more deeply and durably. Scholars in psychology and social sciences use the historical trauma framework that was developed initially for Indigenous studies to talk about how collective traumatic events, including slavery, can shape family patterns, coping mechanisms, and community narratives across generations. While not solely relying on genetic inheritance, there is described reflection from psychological, social, and cultural transmission. There has been proposed that there are influences on genes as epigenetic mechanisms, as has been shown in Holocaust survivors. Our first presenter is Susan Bornay. Susan graduated from Little Rock Central High School, received a Bachelor of Arts at Lindenwood and a Master of Library and Information Science at UALR. She is retired from a career in conservation fundraising at the Nature Conservancy. She is now helping care for her 2 youngest grandchildren and is involved in her church, garden, and book clubs. In their retirement with Robin, her husband of 47 years, they enjoy traveling to parks, cities, visiting museums, gardens, and historic preservation sites near and far. They enjoy spending time on Dauphin Island and Eden Isle with their family of 3 children and 5 grandchildren, all of whom live in Little Rock. Their children and their spouses have interesting careers. Their son, Chris, is Director of Mechanical Engineering at Cromwell Firm, and his wife is a pediatric physical therapist. Their daughter, Eliza, is Director of Development at Central Arkansas Library System, and her husband, John Williams, is lead attorney for ACLU. Their daughter, Rachel, is Director of Programs at Our House. Nobody Knows, presented by Susan Bornay.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Madam President, and Chairman of the Day, and all fellow estates and special guests, and my daughters and my oldest friends for being here. So the title of my paper is Nobody Knows, and my assignment was to research the Negro spiritual. My inspiration is how sorrow has an indelible influence on the South, and in particular, Negro spiritual music that grew out of slavery. I have chosen to interpret it by researching the Fisk Jubilee Singers, the famous a cappella choir of Fisk University, the historically Black liberal arts college in Nashville, Tennessee, and the oldest institution of higher education in Nashville. The Jubilee Singers are known for performing Negro spirituals originally sung by slaves prior to the Civil War. Slavery became part of our history in 1619 in Virginia when 20 enslaved Africans were sold to colonists. By the time the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified, abolishing slavery, there were 4 million enslaved people in our country. Their sorrow, their pain, their suffering created a rich musical art form, the Negro spiritual, also called folk hymns, cabin songs, plantation melodies, jubilees. According to the Library of Congress, the Negro spiritual is one of the largest and most significant forms of the American folk song. There would be no hip-hop, R&B, or rap without the Negro spiritual and its call and response format. When the enslaved were brought to America, they spoke many dialects of different languages. In many cases, the Negro spiritual became the universal language for slaves. In 1865, barely 6 months after the end of the Civil War, 3 men, John Ogden, the Reverend Erastus Cravath, and the Reverend Edward Smith, along with the American Missionary Association, established the Fisk Free Colored School in Nashville. The school was named in honor of General Clinton B. Fisk of the Tennessee Freedmen's Bureau, who provided the institution with facilities in former Union Army barracks. Fisk convened its first classes in January of 1866. Some 600 students enrolled, ranging in age from 7 to 70, sharing common experiences of slavery and poverty and a thirst for learning. Within 5 years, the school was in dire financial condition. That's why George L. White, first slide, please. Pictured on the right, treasurer and music professor for the college, organized the choir and took them on tour to raise funds for the university. White was a veteran Union soldier who had served at Gettysburg and Chancellorsville. pictured on the left is a photo of the original choir members taken before they left campus on October 6th, 1871. October 6th is now known as Jubilee Day at Fisk. White's goal of the tour was to raise $20,000. They were successful, and indeed wildly successful. Their U.S. tour matched the route of the Underground Railroad, a network of churches and private homes throughout the Midwest and Northeast that had once provided shelter to escaped slaves. While touring, they encountered severe racial prejudice in the North as well as the South, but they were also warmly received by huge audiences captivated by the African American spiritual music, which was little known among white audiences. Early on in their tour, the choir members became exhausted. Mr. White renamed the choir the Jubilee Singers as encouragement. Jubilee is a reference to the book of Leviticus, chapter 25. The Lord commands the Israelites to observe a Sabbath for the land and to observe the year of Jubilee, a time of liberation and homecoming. From then on, they gained in popularity. According to Ron Chernow, in his biography of Mark Twain, he writes, with special fervor, Twain promoted the Jubilee Singers, who were started in 1871 to raise money for the school and to counter hideous caricatures of Blacks presented by minstrel shows that were in vogue on the American stage at that time. Twain heard the choir in Hartford in 1872 at the Asylum Hill Congregational Church, and the Hartford Courant reported it was like a revelation. One heard in those strange and plaintive melodies the sadness and the hope of a trusting and a really joyous race. In Washington, D.C., Vice President Henry Wilson, with his family and many members of Congress, came to their concerts. President Grant gave them audience at the White House. Over the 18 months of touring the United States, they raised $40,000. Over a 3-year period, the Jubilee Singers sang throughout the United States, Scotland, for a year-long British tour, performing for Queen Victoria and Prince Albert and the Princess of Wales, and throughout Europe. During their time in London, Mark Twain endorsed the Jubilee Singers once again with the following: I heard them sing once, and I would walk 7 miles to hear them sing again. You will recognize that this is strong language for me to use when you remember that I was never fond of pedestrianism. They returned to their beloved school with nearly $100,000, and that's over $2.5 million in today's dollars. In many cases, they had been turned away from hotels and railway waiting rooms because of their race, but they had been received with honor by heads of state. They had sung their slave songs before the Queen and her Prime Minister. Their success was as remarkable as their mission was unique. The funds raised by the singers went toward paying off the school's debt, paying for a 40-acre parcel of land north of downtown Nashville, and erecting the school's first building, Jubilee Hall. Second slide, please. On the left is an engraving of Jubilee Hall, completed in 1876, built in the style of Victorian Gothic as a memorial to the spirituals and the singers who sang them. On the right is a portrait of the Jubilee Singers painted in 1873. It was a gift from England to Fisk, commissioned by Queen Victoria. After returning home to Nashville to rest and regroup, the Fisk Jubilee Singers went on tour again. Now under the direction of Frederick Loudon, one of the singers, they toured, this is amazing to me, the American West, Asia, Australia, and New Zealand in the 1880s. Group travel in the 1880s. Fast forward, last slide, please. On the left is a photo of Jubilee Hall as it stands today, a National Historic Landmark. And on the right is a photo of today's Fisk University Jubilee Singers, taken in Jubilee Hall in front of the portrait of the original singers. In the center is their longtime director, the late Paul T. Kwame, a native of Ghana and a Fisk graduate who cemented the ensemble's modern reputation as one of the country's premier interpreters of African American spiritual music. According to Kwame, spirituals played many roles in slave communities. They could be lamentations or celebrations. At the same time, they could serve as a means of stealth communication within the slave community. Under Dr. Kwame's leadership in 2007, the Fisk Jubilee Singers were inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. In 2008, they received the National Medal of the Arts, the highest recognition for artistic excellence given by the United States government. In 2021, they won their first Grammy for Best Roots Gospel Album for their 150th anniversary album. I can't deliver a paper about Fisk Jubilee Singers without playing just a little bit of two spirituals. The first is Nobody Knows the Trouble I See, a recording from 100 years ago, a powerful African American spiritual expressing deep personal suffering, isolation, and hardship, particularly rooted in the experience of slavery, yet offering hope through faith, acknowledging that only God truly understands such profound sorrow while also conveying the resilience to keep going. And that's from the liner notes. So, first song.
Oh, nobody knows the trouble I see. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I see. Glory, hallelujah.
And more recently, in 2003, Ride On Jesus, a song of celebration. Ride On Jesus represents Jesus' return as a conquering king who brings justice and liberation from oppression. It also gives hope and resilience for marginalized people, symbolizing a spiritual victory over earthly bondage and injustice, also from the liner notes.
Ride on, Jesus, ride on, King Jesus, ride on, conquering King. I want to go to heaven in the morning. Oh, ride on, Jesus, ride on, King Jesus, ride on, conquering King. I want to go to heaven in the morning. If you see my sister, just tell her please. I'm gonna ride my horse, I'm gonna ride. If you see my mother, just tell her please.
Thank you, Lynn. How did Nashville become known as the Music City? Well, it wasn't because of country music. It was Queen Victoria, who was so moved and inspired by the Jubilee Singers and their music that she said they must have come from a city of music. The Fisk Jubilee Singers is an amazing story, from slavery to stardom. They introduced Negro spirituals to the world and saved their university from financial ruin. This year, Fisk University celebrates its 160th year. And in closing, words from Mark Twain: no music has surpassed in beauty and feeling the songs and spirituals that have arisen from slavery. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. That was great. Dr. Wita Keck is Professor Emerita of Music. She received a Bachelor of Music from Ouachita Baptist, where she graduated magna cum laude. She holds a Master of Music degree from the University in Fayetteville and her doctorate in piano performance and pedagogy from Iowa. Dr. Keck's career has included in-state and out-of-state performances. She was on the faculty of OBU teaching piano, music appreciation, and piano pedagogy, and had her own piano studio. Dr. Keck has served as president of the Arkansas State Music Teachers Association, as province officer for Sigma Alpha Iota, as vice president of the National Music Council in New York, and served as president of the National Federation of Music Clubs, the country's largest music organization, where an endowed scholarship has been established in her honor. Wita has served as president of the Arkansas Symphony Guild, president of her PEO chapter, and is an elder at Second Press. She served as Arts Division Chair of National Federation of Music Clubs most recently, and serves on its bylaws committee. The Arkansas Federation of Music Clubs named Dr. Keck Musician of the Year in 94 and 97, and she was honored as an outstanding college teacher. She was recognized nationally by the Music Teachers National Association as a Foundation Fellow for her outstanding contributions to the field of music and teaching. Dr. Keck was professor of piano at Ouachita, where she served 30 years on the faculty. She loves to travel, cook, and entertain, and is married to former OBU professor Dr. George Keck. Wita joined the Aesthetic Club in 2016 and has served on the music committee since 2017, having served as chair and is now co-chair. We've had the wonderful and fortunate pleasure of hearing Wita 21 times. This will be her 22nd performance for the club. She will announce her program.
Thank you. Madam President, fellow aesthetes, and guests, slavery left many marks on society and U.S. culture. Spirituals were an outgrowth of this horrendous time in our country and have remained an important influence in our musical world. The syncopated rhythms, minor keys, and fragments of tunes in popular music, jazz, and blues in particular are easily recognized. Classical composers of all races were also influenced by the unfortunate happenings during this time, and some were inspired to develop their compositional styles by musically incorporating emotions conveyed in Negro spirituals and by the tragedies of slavery. Today, I will be demonstrating 3 different ways in which Afro-American composers, recognized in the field of classical music as some of the best, were influenced in their composition by their heritage. William Grant Still, although born in Mississippi, was raised in Little Rock and is considered by some as the dean of Afro-American composers. He is the first Black composer to have an opera performed by the New York City Opera, was the first Afro-American composer to conduct a major symphony orchestra in the U.S., but he also wrote scores for TV shows such as Gunsmoke, Perry Mason, and the Three Stooges. I am playing a short movement from his suite for piano called Dark Horseman, in which he supposedly portrays the story of a soul going to judgment after death while being accompanied by the hoofbeats of the horses and shrieks of anguish caused by their presence. In my interpretation of this, I imagine the darkness of this situation, possibly a runaway slave being chased by men on these horses. Florence Price was raised in Little Rock, and with degrees from the New England Conservatory in Organ and Pedagogy, she was the first Afro-American woman to be recognized as a symphonic composer and was the first to have a work played by a major symphony orchestra. Her over 300 compositions are now recognized by major orchestras and symphony players throughout the U.S., including our own Arkansas Symphony Orchestra. The second movement of her E minor piano sonata that I will play demonstrates her romantic treatment of a spiritual-like melody and a recurring rondo theme. A composer of many piano works in varying levels, she uses syncopated rhythms with simple harmonies and cadenza-like passages in this piece while demonstrating her skill in pianistic composition. Florence Price is not only a first-rate composer, she was a teacher and the teacher of Chicago-born Margaret Bonds, the first Black soloist to appear with an all-white, all-male Chicago Symphony Orchestra, where she played Florence Price's piano concerto. Known primarily as an arranger of Negro spirituals, Bonds, a graduate of Northwestern University, also composed works in traditional Western classical style. I will play a selection of Troubled Waters from her spiritual suite for piano. Based on Wade in the Water, the spiritual used by Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad to warn escaping slaves to cover their tracks and scent, Bonds, a political activist and colleague of the poet and writer Langston Hughes, assures us that the troubled waters of life are healing waters because God is in the midst of the turmoil.
while. That was really, really nice. Erin McCarley is a fifth-generation Arkansan born in Little Rock and raised in Batesville. She attended Sewanee before completing her doctoral studies at the University of Kansas in Latin American Literature and Cultural Studies. She returned to Little Rock in 2010 to join the faculty at UALR and later serve in academic administration. She now works for the state of Arkansas as part of the team developing Arkansas Launch, a one-stop portal that will connect Arkansans with opportunities in education, employment, enlistment, and supportive services. An Arkansas aficionada, Erin is a past president and current member of the Historic Arkansas Museum Foundation Board and actively volunteers with Arkansas United. She is an avid reader and enjoys cooking, sewing, and spending time with her family. Her favorite pastime is visiting Southwest Little Rock for tacos, Spanish conversation, and shopping at the Supermercado Sin Fronteras. The Weeping Time, presented by Erin McCarley.
Good afternoon, Madam President, Madam Chairman, fellow aesthetes and guests. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and present to you my paper on The Weeping Time, the largest slave auction in U.S. history. But first, as a way of segue from our extraordinary musical presentation today, in 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois published The Souls of Black Folk, a collection of 14 essays on the Black experience in American history. Prefacing each essay with a Black spiritual, Du Bois crowned his book with a final essay on sorrow songs, which he designated, quote, the single spiritual heritage of the nation and the greatest gift of the Negro people. As testimony to the songs we have heard this afternoon, this paper explores one of the most sorrowful histories of our nation's slaveholding past. On March 2nd and 3rd, 1859, just 2 years before the Civil War, the largest recorded slave auction in U.S. history took place at Tenbrook Racecourse in Savannah, Georgia. First slide. Here's a photo of descendants from this slave auction at the memorial site. For 2 days, rain poured down on the 436 men, women, children, and babies sold to buyers from across the United States. Between the relentless rain and the tears of families being torn apart, this auction became known as the Weeping Time. This site has been the site of recent controversy due to development plans for light industrial use and a proposed housing shelter. Next slide, please. Its size notwithstanding, the Weeping Time was no ordinary auction. All 436 people sold had lived and worked on the Butler plantation in the Georgia Sea Islands on Butler Island. Next slide. Of Gullah Geechee descent, these individuals formed a tight-knit community that had labored together for generations on the rice and cotton fields of the large estate. The auction separated not only nuclear families, but severed a community of extended family from each other and from their coastal home, central to Gullah Geechee culture. The 436 Butler slaves represented all of the skilled labor, from field hand to carpenter to blacksmith, midwife, and cook, required to run a plantation. This variety of skilled trade attracted speculators, along with the fact that the Butler slaves were relatively healthy and compliant. Historian Anne C. Bailey writes that the Butler overseer boasted of controlling the slaves with, quote, an equitable distribution of rewards and punishments. The Butler Plantation was an absentee plantation managed by overseers, while the Butlers lived lavishly in Philadelphia. Pierce Butler Jr. inherited Butler Island from his grandfather, Major Pierce Butler, a senator representing South Carolina and an original signer of the U.S. Constitution. His wife, Fanny Kemble, was an actress who came from a British stage family and who had strong abolitionist leanings. The pair apparently never discussed slavery when they were courting and first met in 1832, but Fanny's convictions became a source of contention, culminating when the couple spent 3 months on the plantation in 1838. Fanny documented her horror in letters and in her anti-slavery treatise, Journal of a Residence on a Georgia Plantation, which Butler forbade her to publish. The marriage ended in divorce in 1847. Butler subsequently squandered his family's fortune, losing more than $700,000 in gambling debts and the stock market crash of 1857. To pay his debts, he chose to liquidate his 436 pieces of human property, giving each slave a $1 coin as a token of his condolence at the slave auction upon transfer to their new owners. After the Emancipation Proclamation and the war's end in 1865, many former Butler slaves tried to find one another, having been displaced across the war-torn nation. Bailey documents successful reunions and descendants' efforts to honor their ancestors through genealogy and cultural heritage. Next slide, please. And here are some of the 436 chairs that were placed out for a memorial of the weeping time in Savannah. Poet Honoré Fannin Jeffers's 2021 novel, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, which I read this summer just before being assigned this topic, and I highly recommend, untangles the generational trauma from the weeping time in a redemptive family epic. In her narrative, sorrow songs bear witness to the ongoing grief caused by both human cruelty and greed. In the spirit of our sense of place, our theme for this year's Aesthetic Club, I'd like to close by reflecting on slave auctions in Arkansas history. Bailey writes that the average slave was sold 6 times over their lifetime, and the auction was the most traumatic experience of slave life. In her book on slavery in Arkansas, Kelly Houston Jones points out that most Arkansas slaves were displaced from their families back east, having been sold to come to Arkansas and forced to travel a very painful second Middle Passage to this swampy frontier. Most labored on absentee plantations in the Delta and southwest part of the state, but many were also isolated in rural farms in the Ozarks or labored here in the city in Little Rock. Originally constructed in 1840, this building that our sisters have met in since 1894 was likely built by enslaved people also displaced from their homes. As we listen to these stories and songs of sorrow, may we contemplate the work of their hands around us, remembering the heartbreak and endurance that engendered their labor and the history of our state and nation. Thank you.
Excellent paper. Thank you, Erin. Excellent. If there's no further business, we are adjourned.